So I'm super excited to be here, and I see a lot of people that are logging in, and so we're going to start just now. We're going to start this presentation. So let's look at the polls. It looks like Uri, lots of folks take shampoo from hotels. Yes, I will raise my hand and admit anonymously that that's what I do as well. We have a few perfect specimens of humans here as well. That's great to see. And
we've got some people who lie to their mothers and do even more, even nastier things like being in the swimming pool, Greg.
Yeah, so we got a perfect conglomerate of humanity here with us today.
Wonderful.
And yeah, go
on. We've got around 24 people actually on this webinar, and we had only 14 people basically joining the first poll. So for those of you who haven't joined in, please do that, because Greg has prepared a number of polls for you that he will basically activate throughout this presentation. So just go to slido.com and enter the code ASK.
And so also when you do that, if you do that on your phone, you'll see that there's a tab for questions. And that's where, as you're seeing what we're presenting here, what I'm talking about, you can type in your questions there. But not only that, you can see other people's questions, and you can upvote them and downvote them. And I'll be relying on you to do that during this presentation. So thank you. So the first poll that we have here is, when selling, what works better, asking or telling? This is really the core message of today's presentation. We're talking about conversational presentations using Slido or really PowerPoint or anything. The days of projecting information and telling people what they should know and think are over. The days of the future of presentation is about asking, it's about engaging. And examples of that are everything from Facebook Live to things that I'll be showing today, like with Prezi Next. So it looks like most people here today think that asking works better than telling. And I heard it said, a wise person, more wise than me, said that people believe in the things that they themselves decide, not the things that you tell them. And I totally think that is true. Good, so there's a couple questions there. Thank you for bringing that over. So keep the questions coming as we start this presentation. So, and I'll be asking more polls. So this presentation is about turning your presentation into a conversation. We'll be talking about PowerPoint and Prezi Next, and what is Prezi Next, and what are the great features of it, what are the not so great features. And so here, let me just point out that I'm with Pitch Kitchen, and we're here with Uri, who's with Slido. And so if I say some things that aren't so great about Prezi or about PowerPoint, you know, I'm not affiliated with those companies, with Microsoft or Prezi. So as it were, you're going to hear the real deal. You're going to hear, you know, my opinion as a communication designer using these tools, and I'm going to be giving you my tips and tricks during this webinar, and sort of no holds barred, and no, what's the word? You know, I'm not incented to push any technology over the other. So I just wanted to make that clear. So starting out this webinar about conversational presentation, what is conversational presenting? It really is, it's a balance, right? You know, you come into a room with people, and on the one hand, you want to be, you know, on message, you want to have your story focused, what you've got prepared to talk to people about. And you've got a goal, you've got a purpose for that meeting. But on the other hand, you've got, you know, you want to have fun, you want to be spontaneous, you want the people you're talking to have a lot of say, if not just as much say, in that presentation, so that it can really be a true conversation, not just a transmission of information. So there's a poll I actually want to put up on the board here. It's like, how do you feel when, you know, you're trapped in a conversation with someone whose sole purpose is for them to talk about themselves? And so this is a cool feature in Slido. With a group of people, you can actually get a word cloud on the screen. So how do you feel when you're in a conversation with someone and they're just like pushing their agenda? Exactly, annoyed, tricked, helpless, bored, frustrated. Absolutely, and you'll see the words that are larger is because many people are choosing those words. This is absolutely true, and so it's like when you're talking about a conversational presenting, you really have to balance this. You know, it can't just be a conversation. I mean, maybe it could, but I think you're there, they're there because there's a goal in mind. And we're going to talk about really a three-way, the three pieces of the power of three, and three ways that a presentation comes together. So just some points about this. So there is proof, there's social proof about how research has been identifying collaborating with prospects as one of the top ways to win a sales pitch. You know, absolutely, collaboration is the best way. Another statistic, about 72% of survey respondents from a Prezi survey found that two-way presentations are more memorable than linear ones. I mean, this is also like no-brainer kind of information, but there is statistical proof about this. And so when we talk about, you know, what's changed, you know, about Prezi Next and presenting in general, you know, it's not anymore about transmission of information. Information is everywhere, and people come to your presentations or you're meeting with people to present to them. They can get a lot of that information on Google. They can ask Siri for information and Alexa. And so they come to your presentations because they want something more. They want something different than that. And we're going to talk more about what people really want when they come and what you guys want when you come to this presentation as well. So I believe that answers are cheap. And that's pretty harsh, but answers really are cheap. And as we move into the future, you can Google it. You can go to Alexa, and you can find out anything you want to know in your pocket, on your phone. What you can't find is an experience, or you can't find a scenario where you're getting really immediate feedback and you're really getting someone to pay attention to you. That's becoming rare. So I like to think about presentations are being three-way. Instead of just a one-way presentation, which is a transmission of information, instead of a two-way presentation, which is a little bit of back and forth, my agenda and your agenda, I like to look at presentations as three ways. So here's a really interesting diagram that explains this three-way concept. So on the one side, well, you've got three. On one base, you have the presenter, which is you, or in this case, it's me. On the other base, you have the topic, okay, what we're talking about today, the topic of conversational presentations, Prezi Next. And then the third piece is your interest in the topic and why you're here, what you'd like to get out of it, and making sure that that piece is part of this whole discussion. So the zone, as I call it, is when this Venn diagram all comes together. That's the spot that I'd like to be as a presenter, and I know that you'd like to be there in that zone when you're presenting your presentations. Good. So let me put up a poll right now. And I'm doing that on my phone, by the way. There's an app called a Switcher connected to Slido. So if we think about what the purpose, what is the purpose of your presentation? So if on your phone you can vote right now. Is the purpose of your presentation to transmit information to people? Is it to create a trusted relationship? Is it to deliver a performance, you know, like a TED-like performance for 20 minutes? You blow people away with how awesome either you are or your thinking about something is. Is it to create web traffic? Some people create presentations just to put out there and get web traffic, or to create a viral phenomenon. So, Uri, what are your thoughts about what people are saying here now?
I think this is very, very interesting to see the results. I mean, like populate in real time. And before we actually, during the pre-webinar basically meeting, we talked about this with Greg, and we thought that people are going to vote for transmit information as the most common use of presentations. And I would like to follow up on what Greg said. Until very recently, this was one of the main purposes of the presentation, but this model completely flipped on its head. And we've got access to all that information. However, what we don't really have, or we are not actually that often in those situations, is the conversation itself, where great ideas emerge from the conversation, where all those bright minds come together. And that's where we see so much potential in the conversational presenting. Because as Greg mentioned, information is cheap, but we need to basically assimilate that information and make sense out of that. And we can only do that in a conversation. So this is a very interesting statistics that we're seeing over here, Greg.
Yeah, so I mean, you bring up a good point, and I'll put up another poll here. So, let me ask everybody here. So what is the most exciting way that you learn information? Learning information is more than just sort of having it be fed to you. To learn information means that you kind of wrestle with it, you try it on, you experiment with it, it becomes sort of your own. And I find, I learn information best by doing it, by being involved with it, not just by reading a book or, actually, is reading a book an option here? Maybe it should be. But reading a book could be a way to learn information. But it's interesting that this statistic with the live polling that's happening now this is kind of upside down from the previous poll, that people feel that to learn information, they'd rather learn information in a conversation. Your eye.
Absolutely, and I think there is also one very interesting statistic at the very, very bottom, that nobody is very excited about learning information in a seat in a classroom, and I'm absolutely down with you on this one. The funny thing is that very often the presentations still resemble the classrooms very often, and that's also the purpose of conversational presenting, to sort of like break those bad memories that we still have, those times where we were scared to raise a hand and really like engage in a conversation with the presenter. And I think this is our responsibility, to create that question-asking environment and create the environment where we can lead a meaningful discussion where everybody feels safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about Prezi Next and what Prezi Next is, and I'll be hopping out of this sort of presentation mode and opening up the hood and showing you what's in Prezi Next and how it works. But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about Prezi versus PowerPoint. Oh, actually, no, I'm not going in that order. So I'm going to come back here. I'll hit Prezi versus PowerPoint. Let me go there. So if I was in a room right now, I'd say, let's see a show of hands here of who has used PowerPoint. Basically, everyone's hands would be raised. So if I say, who here has used Prezi, I'd see, okay, there's a few hands in the room. They've used Prezi. So just so everyone knows, Prezi has come out with a new platform called Prezi Next. And from using Prezi Next, I'll tell you my judgments, it's almost as if Prezi, the guy, and PowerPoint, the gal, got together, they got busy, and they made a baby. And the baby, in this case, she's a baby girl. The baby girl's got some problems. She's a problem child, in my opinion. But you could actually do some amazing things with Prezi Next, some things you could never do with PowerPoint for sure. Things that you could do with Prezi Classic. However, Prezi Next is a very easy platform to use, and within, say, 20 minutes, you can create a presentation. I think that was the goal of Prezi Next as well, to make it super easy for you. So just some comments about Prezi Next before we sort of open the hood and show you what it looks like and stuff. Unlike Prezi Classic, ideation happens outside. And so what do I mean by that? Is that, like, if you're building a PowerPoint, before you even open up your PowerPoint, you kind of have to sketch out what is your outline, what is your story, how is it all coming together, and then you go to PowerPoint to build it out. So Prezi Next is kind of like that too, because I'll show you in a couple minutes how when you launch Prezi Next, the first thing you have to do is choose a template. But how do you even choose a template if you don't know what your story is about? So you really have to think of Prezi Next just like you think of PowerPoint, as a tool that you go to once your ideation has happened. The second thing you should understand about Prezi Next, in my opinion, again, these are my opinions, I don't work for Prezi or for Microsoft, is that your options within Prezi Next are limited. And so that's not a bad thing. Sometimes limitations, it creates a discipline and a focus for the things that you want to present. But they are limited. You can't do anything that you want in it. You can't do the things that, say, Prezi Classic, which came out several years ago, you can do. And I'm not exactly sure of the reasons why the options are limited. It could be because they want a lot of people to just get happy using it. But it is kind of like color in the numbers. And I'll show you in a minute what I mean by that. So I'm going to pop out of this presentation here for the moment and show you what I mean by that. So right now I'm in the editing mode of this presentation, and the way that you navigate is you can go to your overview, and so you'll see there are 4 sections here. There's a conversational presenting section, there's a Prezi versus PowerPoint section. You've already seen this bubble here. We dove in already to Prezi versus PowerPoint. You haven't seen my advice or handling questions yet. We're going to get to that later. But the way this is structured is on a topic basis. So each topic is kind of in its own bubble. So if we want to go to the My Advice section here, you can see this is loaded with 3 sub-bubbles. Okay? So the way that Prezi Next is organized by a topic and subtopic hierarchy, almost like if you would have an agenda with an agenda points and sub-agenda points. And this is a very, very different model than Prezi Classic. It's also a different model than PowerPoint, which is just strictly slides going in order, and you have to arrange your slides based on topic and subtopics. But the beauty of this, though, I mean, there is some redeeming qualities to this problem child. Here, let me bring this up here, is that when you first open up Prezi Next and you want to create a presentation, that you'll see on the left side of my screen, you'll see all these templates that are pre-designed. And what I found by looking at these templates is that some of them are really cool, and some of them are not so cool. But I think the bottom line is you're trying to color in one of these templates with your concept, your ideas. And what I find as a visual communication designer and working with our clients at Pitch Kitchen, that it's rare to find a template that fits. Sometimes, you know, the colors won't work for branding. Sometimes the visuals just won't work, don't fit. So it needs a lot of customization, and that's fine. And you can certainly do that customization on your own, but there are a lot of limitations as to how much you can customize and what you can customize, what you can't within Prezi Next. And this is what we help our clients with, by the way. So here's a template that we can explore, and you can see that this template has several sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. And if you explore this template, you can see how this centrally works, that there's sections and then subsections within this template. And that if you were going to use this template, you'd have to pretty much delete everything and then put in your own content. So this is essentially giving you some ideas, some graphic ideas of how you might want to work. And I think that's helpful on the one hand, but I also think it's locking in on the other hand, because it kind of forces you to think about not just what it is that you're trying to present, but you're trying to shoehorn in what you're presenting to what's on the screen, and that could be a handicap. So I mean, that's and so by the way, you can't create a blank template with this. So if you scroll down to the bottom, there's no way to create a blank template. So just so you have some background there about Prezi in itself, so Prezi used to have a platform called Prezi Classic, and that's what this is. And so this is, you can switch over from Prezi Classic to Prezi Next. And if you create a new account with Prezi, you're actually not able to get any Prezi Classics or create a Prezi Classic, which is sad, because I think this is a great tool. There is actually a hack, a workaround that I can share to folks who would like to know how to access Prezi Classic. But let me just share with you what I like about Prezi Classic, because this is still, in a way, available. And so what I like about Prezi Classic is that you can start a blank Prezi, and instead of choosing a template here, you can really use Prezi as a place to drop all your images, to put your ideas on the board, almost like in a whiteboard fashion, and then you could decide relationships, what's important, what's not important. And this is really helpful for a presenter as you're developing your concept for your presentation, so that you could really, what I call it's ideation, mind mapping of your talk. So this is something that was available in Prezi Classic that's not available in Prezi Next, and I just thought I'd tell you those details since you came to this presentation to learn about Prezi Next. So if you've got questions, are there any questions that are popping up there, Uri, that we should hop over to?
Yeah, we've got a number of questions in, actually.
Okay. So there's a question here. Let me just push this on the screen. Show questions. And then let me move this here. will Prezi Classic continue to be supported? So I don't know the answer to that because I'm not with Prezi, and gosh, I hope so because it is awesome, and I'm going to just archive that. The question here, which presentation software would I recommend? And we'll get to that at the end. That's a great question. What is the most effective technique to open a presentation? Let me just bring that to the top. Yeah, so the best way to open a presentation, I feel, is with a question. And that's a great segue to talk about some very specific things you should do at the beginning of the presentation, and how you should structure your presentation in a way so that you've got questions throughout, not just the beginning, but also at the end. All right, so let me go to the switcher, and then go to show presentation. All right, so let's go to Prezi versus PowerPoint. Again, this is our nice little family with the Prezi Next baby. And we talked a little bit about that. Let's go to handling questions. So the question that came up before was, how do you best start a presentation? And I think you should plan your presentation to be a conversation. So what does that mean? Like Uri and I have planned for this particular presentation with a bunch of questions to ask you. I think it's really super important to come prepared with questions that are very provocative and questions that you don't know the answers to, because those are actually the best kind of questions, because not only do you learn something, they get to share what's really going on for them. So here are a couple good questions that you could throw on the table when you're starting a presentation. And I think this is the best one. You know, what are you trying to accomplish? You know, what's most important to you about what you're trying to accomplish? Another great question is, well, what have you discovered already? And so starting there and really taking in where people's heads are at and what's important to them is a great way to start a presentation. Uri, any comments?
Absolutely, I'd like to follow up on this. And very often as speakers, we expect to receive the questions, and very few of us actually prepare the questions for the audience. And that's really an effective way how to start a conversation. But now referring back to the stats of one of the polls, that nobody is very eager to learn new information in a seat in a classroom, because we have this kind of phobia of providing the wrong answer. So us as presenters, we should be more like a facilitators who are going to basically put people together. If we have 100 or 200 people sitting in the room, we can split them in small groups or in pairs and get them actually to discuss the question that we ask them. And in these smaller groups, they are more open to share the ideas, and they don't feel that they are being evaluated. So this is a very effective technique how to actually generate the conversation amongst the participants. And then when you ask the volunteers to share some of the insights that they shared in the smaller groups, they're really eager to do that. Because sometimes if we ask them just a question and expect people to raise their hand, we might not have any reaction. But by forming those smaller groups and getting them to talk about the question that we posed, that's a very, very effective facilitation technique how to generate that conversation.
So speaking of skills, right, what it takes to do presentations today, it's not just about, as you're saying, Uri, to have all the answers. If you're a presenter, you don't have to have all the answers. Answers are cheap, remember. It's really honoring the question that has become important. So when you're honoring people's questions, you may be more of an MC and facilitating a discussion. You may get people that are taking your presentation down a rat hole, taking it places where you don't want to go, or using up all the valuable time that you have with all these people, and it's a waste for you and a waste for other people in the room. So how do you deal with that? So I want to address that for a couple minutes here. So I talk this conclusion Calvin. This is somebody who we've all been there with presenting when there's been someone who jumps to a conclusion real fast and voices that conclusion. So one way to deal with Calvin is really praise that they're participating, but really say that you want to step them through exactly how that would work, and then postpone answering that question to when you want to answer that because sometimes you have to pack answers before you can even get to questions, because you'll lose everybody in the room. You'll also experience what I call Smart Sammy. So Smart Sammy is somebody who really just wants attention and wants everyone in the room to know that maybe they're the smartest person in the room, maybe they're not the smartest. So they will throw out a question that will drive a certain agenda or drive a thing that maybe you don't want to go down because it'll sap the time that you have. So you can always say to Sammy, great question, given the time we have, can we schedule a time to go deeper into that with you? And 9 out of 10 times, or 10 out of 10 times, the answer will be yes, because Sammy's goal there is just to impress everybody with his knowledge or her knowledge. So then you also have someone who typically is in a presentation where maybe I call them Hidden Agenda Hilda. And this person, you've all encountered them, where they'll ask a question, but they won't really say why they're asking the question, but it's a very specific question, and it's possible if you answer it the wrong way in the presentation that the whole thing will go to hell in a handbasket. So the way I would recommend you deal with Hidden Agenda Hilda is by answering that question briefly, but always follow it up with, well, why do you ask? Why is that important to you? Because you don't know the context. You don't know the reason why Hilda is asking that question. In fact, that's probably one of the best advice that I was ever given when dealing with questions that may derail your purpose for this presentation. Any comments there? Uri, by the way, feel free to jump in.
No, those are great tips. I totally agree. But I was just wondering, Greg, what are your tips when we don't get any questions? Because I think this is a very common situation. You know, we conclude our talk, and then we expect some questions from the audience, but there are none. Any tips how to tackle this?
Yeah, well, I think there are no questions because people are nervous or people are not engaged in the topic. Or, yeah, I actually I don't know how to do that. I think you can always stop talking and say, okay, let's just stop talking right now and see what you guys think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to build on what you said, the last thing. And I spoke exactly about this with a professional moderator, and he told me that you're right. You need to realize that people are in a listening mode, especially when you basically deliver some kind of information. And you need to sort of switch them from this listening mode to the interactive mode. And you can do it very easily by a simple facilitation technique. Then you just tell them, okay, guys, now think for 30 seconds and think of a good question. Think of a relevant question that you might have on this for what I've just talked about, for the Q&A. And just crowdsource or collect those questions proactively. Get people from this listening mode to the interactive mode. Give them some time to breathe. And this is not a very easy thing to do, but in terms of the silence that follows actually your this statement that you introduced it with. But if you're going to try it, loads of questions can come in, especially if you use the interaction tools. People start submitting them in. If you don't, people will get the chance to think of the question and raise their hand.
Yeah, it's funny because I realize that in webinars, often people wait to the last 10 seconds of the webinar to actually ask their question because they're moving from listening mode, as you were saying, to participation mode. And so we're talking now about skills. We're talking not just about Prezi Next or PowerPoint. I mean, those are great tools, and you could do them. You can create great visual presentations, but that fall completely flat because you don't have the skills to use these tools to have a meaningful presentation. And so here's the question we're asking. What kind of skills do you need to conduct a conversational presentation? And this is interesting, improvisation skills, because that's kind of what a conversation is. Like, it could go anywhere. And I agree. And I think, you know, I saw Mark Zuckerberg on Facebook Live, and I'm realizing, even though I'm not all that comfortable with Facebook Live yet, I'm realizing that also is the future of presentations, to just talk to a large number of people, maybe your family, friends on Facebook Live, and interact live with them in this way. So improvisation skills are really important in the future. I think it's interesting because 10 years ago, to be a really good presenter, is different than what it is today. 10 years ago, to be a great presenter, maybe it is you're a good performer or you're a good actor, where you can deliver something that's scripted. But I think today improvisation skills are at the top.
I totally agree, and I think the two second skills that followed are also very important. How we are able to actually facilitate that conversation, because there are so many stakeholders that we need to sort of bring together and make sure that we're all moving the right direction. And that basically ties with the last one, that it's also about strategic thinking, because we need to have a clear storyline, the clear points that we want to deliver throughout the session, even though we are trying to lead the conversation. We need to have that end goal in mind so we don't actually go astray.
Yeah, there's that balance. If you're not a strategic thinker, if you're not really applying, you're like, how am I going to direct this this meeting, then you will end up down some rat hole. All right, so there's one area that I want to cover, and this is my advice. So I shared actually a little bit of my advice before, Prezi Next versus PowerPoint. I actually think both could be amazing for you, and that you should focus really on structuring your presentation around the power of three. We're going to talk about that, and then you could use things in Prezi, which is really what I think Prezi does best, and that is what I call mnemonics. So mnemonics is the memory. It's like memory. I think it means memory, actually. And the method of loci is a memory method that the memory champions of the world, who could like remember thousands of people's names in an hour, the way that they do that is they're basically hacking an aspect of our brains, which is to remember ideas and objects as they are placed in a visual space. So you're looking at here my kitchen. It's a rather messy kitchen. But what's interesting about this is I know where everything is in my kitchen, and you know where everything is in your kitchen. And when you're using Prezi Next, what's great about that is, like you saw before, we've got, let me just back up here, you'll see that the way I've organized this Prezi is kind of like my kitchen, where I've got different, basically, containers of information in certain areas of this room. One's on the table, one's on the wall, one's to the right of the conference table. And if you have a presentation that you're delivering and there's a lot of information, but you want to basically feel comfortable that you've memorized all the content and can very spontaneously go anywhere that you need to, this taps this method of loci. And so, by the way, you're probably wondering, who is this guy with the rubber chicken? That's me when I was 13 presenting, I was doing magic tricks to a bunch of kids. And it was an awful experience, actually, because even though my mom took this, I was all happy. There was a kid in the back of the room who was just calling out how I was doing all these magic tricks. And I remember just like totally humiliated, running out of the room. But I think it was a big lesson learned for me that to being a great presenter is not just having your canned magic tricks presenting to people, but is having a way to involve and to incorporate and to engage people that you're presenting to. So for me, that was one of the biggest learning moments of my teenage years, although I think I was 12 there. So here's my kitchen again. And so to think of Prezi Next as a way for you to help remember things, it's also not just good for you as a presenter, it's good for you, it's good for your audience, because your audience will also be helped remembering the relationship of these objects and these ideas and how they relate to each other in space. The second bit of advice is the power of three. This is huge. You'll read this in every presentation book. If you're going to tell a story, beginning, middle, and end, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, past, present, future, everything. People remember three. So this is just part of like our DNA. And if you could prepare your presentation so it really utilizes this power of three sections or three topics. And you can have subtopics. You can have subtopics if you want to. You can go like 3 layers deep on each of those. That said, I think it really helps you as a presenter have a conversational presentation when you're utilizing the power of three. So this is a book that I'm reading recently, and it talks about planning your story, and it focuses on the power of three. And so this is one presentation. The first section here is what's real, what that means to you, and moving forward. So if you're going to create a presentation, I recommend the power of three. If three doesn't work for you, then I recommend five. But never even numbers like I've done in this presentation, by the way. And I can't really explain why. It's kind of magic. The last bit of advice I'd like to offer is use Slido for insights and engagement. And we've been using Slido here in this presentation. And I think it's magic. It's magic because it allows you to not just have a conversation between you and your audience, but it actually allows your audience to, in a way, have a conversation with each other, all focused on the topic. So right now, if I go to the questions tab, I see that some people have anonymously upvoted some questions that they want me or Uri to talk about. That's really the magic of this. That allows the presenter, allows you, when you're presenting, to surf the zeitgeist of the group, or to empower the wisdom of the group that you're talking to, so that you can really connect with that. So I'm going to ask that first question that's voted number 3 on my phone here. It says, how does Prezi Next work in creating a printed slide deck versus Prezi Classic? Yeah, so printed slide decks, a lot of people like to have leave behinds. And I think that's important. But if I were you, I would, yeah, thank you, Uri, for putting that up. If I were you, I would have 2 things. I'd have a presentation that really helps you deliver this information, but also have a conversation, which looks very different than a delivered printed document with a lot more detail that someone could flip through on their coffee table. So I think that you should have 2 vehicles for that. One vehicle for the presentation and one vehicle with a lot more information in it for a leave behind. Which leads me to some aspect of Prezi Next that I think is super powerful. And so I'm just going to pop out of this and show you what I mean. It's the analytics piece of Prezi Next. So let's go to my presentations here. So analytics would be like showing you, if I, like after this webinar is over, I could send out this Prezi Next link to everybody that came to see it. And that what I could do, if I wanted to, is I can see, okay, who opened it, how long they've spent on it, and what slides were of particular interest. Now, here's my thoughts on that. So this kind of analytics is awesome for marketers, for people, you know, if you're sending out your presentation and you just want to get a sense of people who are interested. But this kind of analytics does not help with creating trust or having a conversational presentation. If you want to create a conversational presentation with Prezi Next, you can do the things that we're talking about before. But analytics will give you a sense of who's interested in the presentation, you know, after you sent it to them. But it could be that they loved the presentation when they watched it, but they didn't click on the link because they got everything. So the analytics, at best, in my opinion, is a shadow indicator, or it's a lag measure. It's a shadow indicator of interest, but really, I don't think it's going to help you like close a deal or anything. I think it'll just give you some indication of who's looked at it. So I'm in Prezi Next right now, and you can see it's pretty cool. I mean, it gives you indication of what slides people spend time on and looked at. And so I think this is interesting, especially in businesses that, you know, harp on getting more and more visualization of data around who's looking at their presentations. However, I have to say, though, that while this is cool, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is creating trusted relationships with your audience, and that can't be done through analytics. That can only be done through great presentations. All right, so let's go back to some questions here. I'm going to the switcher, show questions. Uri, do you want to answer one of these questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the first one is very interesting about the best techniques to create a conversation with a large audience of let's say 100, 200 people. And I've had this discussion with our boss for ages. And I think one of the ways how to do that is the technique I mentioned before, is really to sort of divide these larger audience and split it into smaller groups. So you create this kind of an intimate environment where you can actually trigger the discussion. So if you ask them, let's say, a question as Greg suggested, or if you give them a statement to basically discuss or process a certain chunk of information, that's an ideal way how to create the smaller conversations within the large audience. And then it's also about creating those question asking environments. If you're using the audience interaction tools like Slido or anything else, you need to facilitate that crowdsourcing of questions. And once you collect those questions, only then basically you are able to start leading the conversation with the audience. So just the two techniques over here to sort of address this question. Greg, anything else you'd like to?
Yeah, that's good. I actually think that audiences of 200 people, you can do what we're doing right now. I mean, I feel like we're having a quiet conversation with, a group of about, 50 people. So let me answer this question. Flip side of another question, can you convert Prezi Next to Prezi Classic and then use the functionality of Prezi Classic? Short answer, no. So sorry. I wish that was possible. All right, so let's answer some of these other questions.
I like the next one. Somebody's asking that often as presenters, we need to deliver some information and how to actually combine it with a sort of conversation or conversational techniques. And that's absolutely true. And I think the sort of the main tip over here is to create the chunks of the content that we need to deliver. Just don't talk for 30 minutes straight because you're gonna put people to sleep. Just speak for 5 to 10 minutes, then let's say do a live poll, then create minute discussions in the audience, then play a video or any other techniques that will re-engage and re-energize people. So you need to be both a presenter that is able to deliver information in an effective way, and you should also be a facilitator who's going to facilitate the conversations.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, agreed. All right, so let me answer this question. I'm archiving them too. Can you convert a Prezi Classic presentation to Prezi Next? No, you can't, sadly. Yeah. So when giving webinars, video presentations, should you sit close to the camera, stand, use a mic? I don't know, actually. I just know right now I couldn't stand with a mic because I have to touch things on my phone and I got a mouse here as well, so it would be hard to do that. Uri, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually I was thinking about addressing this one too when I saw it coming in. I think the most important thing is how comfortable you are, because the whole webinar takes, with the technical checkup and then usually post-webinar debrief, it's gonna take hour and a half, 2 hours. So you need to be comfortable. One tip that I would give you instead of, finding the right posture is really have some water, because, talking, you will need to get some water. So that might be a trivial tip, but a very useful, and it saved my life a couple of times. Otherwise, find a really comfortable position.
So we're going to be wrapping up here. It's 1:47. I'd like to wrap this up in 3 minutes. So if you have any other questions that are sort of in your mind, spinning about, just type them out anonymously. Happy to answer them. Else, we can always follow up with you after the webinar. So here's a good question. I'm going to put this one at the top here. In what particulars, in your experience, work well to establish trust from the opening of your presentation to strangers? So yeah, I'm learning about how to do that because everybody's strangers in the room, but there's one technique that I found to be such an awesome way to create trust with strangers. Not just strangers between, say, me and the audience, because that's still like a one-to-one relationship. There's some people that may like me, some people may not like me. But one technique that I've seen, which is really awesome, is to, after introducing yourself, to say, hey, everybody, we're all here, and I bet y'all are strangers with each other. Let's just take a minute, and if it's a large room, say, just choose someone sitting next to you and take a minute, introduce yourself to them, and say one thing that you'd like to get out of this presentation. And that's a great way to sort of break the ice with the folks there, so they can sort of meet each other and not be strangers anymore. But I think as a presenter, it allows you to feel like you're not a stranger also to the audience. So that's with large groups. I think with smaller groups, there's some other techniques you can do, like a small group of about 5 people that all come together. I think a good technique there is to say, okay, I've got this presentation prepared that I'm super excited about. It's in Prezi Next. It's awesome. It's really cool to look at. But forget about the presentation for now. Let's go around the room and let's just ask each of us just to check in with what you do and one thing that you'd like to get out of this experience or get out of this presentation. And that allows everyone to introduce themselves, and even though people may know each other in the room, maybe they never actually heard that person say what's important to them or what they'd like to get out of that meeting. So it does help people who are strangers and help people even who know each other get to know each other a little bit better with respect to the topic. And that's where it gets back to this three-part presentation where you've got the presenter, you've got your topic, and your audience. And all 3 of those need to come together to create a great conversational presentation. So I think with that, we're going to wrap up in just 30 seconds. Uri, any closing comments?
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this webinar and hope you did too. Hopefully you had a great time, and thank you very much. If you're going to have any questions for Greg or for me, please feel free to reach out to us. We talk about conversational presenting. We conduct the webinars. We write about these things. So let us know, and we'd be more than happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for taking time out of your day and joining this webinar. I do hope you got some value out of this, and we'll be speaking soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.